sip of nectar, sweet like honey on a summer day. I'll stick with you through the wind and the rain. Sweet like honey on a summer night, like a busy bee taking flight. 2, 1, go! Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like honey, honey. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like honey, honey. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Flying high, take the dive, blue waves across the ocean. Honey straight from the hive, live it up and go with the motion. Sweet like honey on a summer day, I'll stick with you through the wind and the rain. Sweet like honey on a summer night, like a busy bee taking flight. 2, 1, go! Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like honey, honey. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like honey, honey. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Springtime with you, summer with me. Flowers in fields and little yellow bees. Watch as the time passes in a haze. Sweet honey nights, golden honey days. 2, 1, go! Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like honey, honey. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day. Sweet like honey, sweet like honey, honey. Sweet like honey, sweet like a summer day.
Hi, 1 sec. Oh, Jesus, what the hell? Why did my mic. Whoa, why is it like that? Ew. Turn that down. That is loud as hell. I don't know what happened with my mic. I am so sorry if you're wearing headphones. Jesus Christ. What is up with, like. It's so weird. It should not be in the red like that, actually. There we go. That should be a little bit better. I need to finish my tweet. 1 second. I am such a fool. I thought that I had everything ready. I was so ready to click live, and I didn't notice until, like, almost after, like, almost at the very end of the song that everything was, well, not everything. The title was wrong. The notification that got sent out was wrong. The category. Yeah, everything's a mess. Anyway, hello. We're gonna be reading chapter 11 of Through a Glass Divine. It does say... Okay, it does say chapter 11, we're good. It is chapter 11, right? Okay, good. I am all over the place, apparently. And so is my mic. My mic is apparently really loud, and I don't like that. 1 second. There we go. Oh, there's lightning outside. Lovely stuff. Alright. Also, in case you guys didn't already see, I uploaded I uploaded a pretty big VOD recently. Well, I've been uploading VODs here and there, like my old VODs. I've been slowly but surely making progress with that. On my VODs channel on YouTube. My most recent VOD that I uploaded a few hours ago was back in. It was actually my first stream in 2021, I think. It was me playing Deal or No Deal in an old Minecraft server. So if y'all want to watch that, be sure to check out my VODs channel through this link. All right. Now that that's out of the way, let's read some religious trauma. Let's read a story about religious trauma. My favorite. That's not sarcastic, actually. I love reading stories about religious trauma because I relate. Okay. Let's see. Properties. There we go. Boom. Boom. There we go. Alright. So, Bones and the Bees is a fanfiction written by... Did I say Bones and the Bees? I meant to say Through a Glass Divine is written by Bones and the Bees, and it is a fanfiction about some of the members on the Dream SMP. Now, because of the fact that they're characters, I kind of separate them from the Dream SMP fandom, if that makes sense. I just love the SBI Found Family fanfics. Although, if I'm gonna be honest, after I finish this story, I might veer away from SBI fanfics, at least on stream. And, I might read some other stuff. I've been wanting to read some Generation Lost fanfics, so maybe I'll get some of my mutuals on Twitter to recommend me some stuff. Or, if you have any recommendations yourself, be sure to go into my Discord server in the link, and there is a suggestions channel. You can suggest me some fanfictions there. Alright. Chapter 11. A beak jammed into a bone. Summary. The Pythia says something he shouldn't. That's gonna be great. I just want to make sure I think the audio levels are good. I might turn myself down just even more. That should be better. Perfect. Okay, trigger warning. There's descriptions of a panic attack. So, I typically read stuff from the bottom paragraph being at the very bottom. So, if it looks like there's going to be a panic attack happening, I encourage you, if you're triggered by that kind of stuff, to just take a moment and step away from the stream if you need to. Do whatever you need to do to feel safe. Your safety is more important than watching a stream. Hearts. Alright. The Pythia wasn't sure what his and Tommy's plans for the next day were going to be. While he still didn't know how he felt about leaving his cell and facing the others after the argument 2 days prior, he also knew that Tommy couldn't hide in there with him forever. He was going to have to resume his duties in the temple sooner or later, which meant that either the Pythia would spend the day alone with his thoughts, or he'd have to face his fears. In a way, they were two sides of the same coin. His thoughts were jumbled, flashes of painful emotions and questions he knew he wouldn't get answers to. And from the moment he opened his eyes, he felt like he was drowning in his own mind. Clara, Tommy, that name, what Clara wanted from him, what he was capable of, what he wasn't capable of. It was too much. Too much for him to even try to parse through. If he was left to drift in that sea by himself, he was going to lose his mind. Staying behind while Tommy went out would be facing his fears in a different way. Facing the questions he didn't want to put into words. Which was why the Pythia had already begun steeling himself for the day ahead when the familiar knock echoed through his door. Except... thump, thump, thump. That knock wasn't coming from the shared door between his and Tommy's rooms. Breath catching in his throat, the Pythia tightened the blindfold behind his head. Tommy's not in here, he called out, his voice rough with sleep. I know, mate, Phil called back, making the Pythia jolt. Can I come in? I want to talk. What the fuck? Do I really have a choice? The Pythia snapped, invisible hackles on the back of his neck already rising up. There was a deep sigh on the other side of the door. Do you have the blindfold on yet, or are you gonna curse me or whatever the fuck? The Pythia forced himself to his feet, his legs shaking as his muscles began to wake up. I do. With that, the Pythia heard the door unlock with a loud click. The metal groaned as it was pushed open, Phil shouldering his way through before letting it slam shut behind him. Phil didn't seem any different than he had the last time the Pythia had seen him during the argument. His hair had been brushed, and the bags under his eyes were a bit less prominent, but otherwise he looked just as tired and exasperated as ever. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. The Pythia racked his mind to think of why Phil might be there. Maybe he wanted to yell at the Pythia for being the cause of the argument the other day. Or maybe he wanted to know why he and Tommy had stayed inside the entire day before. Maybe he found out that Tommy had fallen asleep on his shoulder at one point and wanted to threaten him so he wouldn't try anything if it happened again. Or... the realization was sharp. It was like a knife had been plunged into his chest. The bird shrieking as Phil's face came into perfect focus. What if Phil was there to tell him he'd changed his mind about killing him? What if they decided to take the risk of a new Pythia showing up just to end this purgatory he'd been trapped in? And what if that's why Tommy wasn't there? Phil knew that Tommy didn't want him to die, so maybe he'd sent Tommy out on an errand to get him out of the way. And by the time he got back, the Pythia would be... gone. You're going to kill me now, aren't you? The Pythia asked, wincing when his voice cracked. Fuck, he wasn't ready. He needed to pray. He needed to ask Claire for forgiveness for failing her. He needed to talk to Tommy. What the fuck? No! Phil exclaimed, his eyes going wide. Why in death's name would you think that? The Pythia blinked. The last time I saw you, your entire group was arguing about my execution. Phil frowned. And I told them we weren't killing you. That still holds true. Oh. The Pythia hadn't even realized he was shaking until he slid down the wall and back onto his blankets. His hands were trembling as he wrapped them around himself, and kept his eyes on the floor as Phil crouched down in front of him. You seem pretty scared for someone who was advocating for his own murder 2 days ago, Phil pointed out. Clenching his jaw, the Pythia took a stuttering breath to try and calm his racing heart. I just woke up. A bullet to the skull wasn't exactly what I thought my breakfast was going to be today. Phil huffed and sat down fully on the floor, crisscrossing his legs and resting his elbows on top of his knees. So you're afraid to die? He asked. Of course I am, Pythia told him, keeping his blindfolded gaze on the ground. Everyone fears death. I don't, Phil countered. The Pythia lifted his head to scowl at Phil. You're a batshit insane heretic. You don't count. At this, Phil grinned. Damn right I am. That still begs the question of why you told the others they were right for wanting to kill you, even though you're scared of it. Were you not listening to anything I said? The Pythia asked, meeting Phil's eyes behind his blindfold. I'm not serving Clara while I'm down here. I can't fulfill my duty to her, and serving her is my only reason for breathing. So even if I don't want to... His breathing hitched. Even if I don't necessarily want to die right now, it seems like the best option for everyone. Phil's brows furrowed. Everyone as in... He trailed off, letting the question hang in the air. For you, the Deathlings, and for you, the Deathlings, since I pose a threat to you all by being here, and then also the best option for Clara, since she'll be able to reset the cycle. He explained, resisting the urge to curl further back against his pillows. A beat passed as Phil considered this. His frown deepened as he cocked his head to the side in a way that was almost bird-like, his icy eyes flickering up and down the Pythia's frame before settling back on his face. What about the best option for you, mate? Phil then asked. Arguably, you should set the biggest stake in this since it's your life on the line. Once again, the Pythia was hit with the realization that the Deathlings truly had no idea how any of this was supposed to work. It's not my life on the line here, the Pythia began, his words slow like he was explaining it to a child. My life belongs to Clara. Everything I am is because of her. So if I can't serve her... He trailed off, letting Phil fill in the blanks for himself. The understanding dawning over Phil's face was slow, but sure. The Pythia watched Phil take a moment, staring at the Pythia like he only now saw what he really was. And he knew that was supposed to be a good thing. The Deathlings would finally see him as the empty vessel he'd always been. Maybe then they could finally stop fucking around and end things like they should have done from the start. The thought made him feel sick to his stomach, but he shoved the bile down. What if I told you that you don't need a reason to exist? Phil suddenly asked, something unreadable in his voice. The words were like a slap to the face. What? You keep saying you owe your life to Clara. Your reason to exist is because of her. But what if I said a life isn't something you owe or need a reason for? Phil continued, his eyes calmly meeting the blindfold. I don't understand, the Pythia said, his heart pounding in his ears again. Why do you serve Clara? The Pythia's breathing stuttered. Because it's my... Don't say it's your fucking purpose of fate or any of that shit. Phil cut in. Give me a real reason. Why do you serve Clara? Because... The Pythia's head was throbbing. Because it's what I'm supposed to do. Phil shrugged. Then why do you think I serve Kristen? We both know it's not what I'm supposed to do. There were a lot of reasons Phil could choose to worship Kristen. Maybe he wanted to justify harming others. Maybe he wanted to not fear death. Maybe he just wanted to be difficult. Either way, though, it all boiled down to one thing. You wanted to. The Pythia answered. Exactly, Phil said, snapping his fingers. I want to worship Kristen. I don't do it because I have to. I don't do it because I'm supposed to. She's the goddess I choose to put my faith in. She's the goddess I choose to put my faith in, because she's given me far more reason to than Clara ever did. Suddenly, he was leaning forward, his hands not touching the Pythia, but ghosting over his arms like he was going to at any second. Religion is a choice, Phil continued, his voice low. Belief isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you choose. You can choose to believe and worship one deity or another, just like you can choose not to worship any of them. It's all about what you want. No, that wasn't right. Worshipping Clara wasn't a choice for the Pythia, because it was the Pythia's duty. And wasn't that how most worship was supposed to be? You fulfilled your duty to your goddess by worshipping her how she wanted you to. Maybe that's how it works when you worship Kristen, but belief and faith in Clara isn't something you can just choose. We all owe her our faith, the Pythia told him. Phil blinked. But you owe her your faith more than anyone, right? The Pythia nodded. Yes, I do. Even though you didn't choose to become the Pythia, you're still expected to have complete and unwavering faith in her simply because the former Pythia told you to? Phil pushed, a crease forming between his brows. To the point of foregoing your own life? Judgment was practically dripping from Phil's words, and the Pythia felt heat rise to his cheeks. Would you not sacrifice your life for Kristen? The Pythia asked, raising an eyebrow. Kristen already knows when and how I'm going to die. But even if she didn't, she would never ask me to take my own life for her. Phil shot back, his eyes narrowing. If the situation called for it, of course I would die for her. That would be my choice, not hers. The Pythia considered this for a moment, before his gaze fell back to the ground. It doesn't matter. Clara is the reason I exist, so it only stands to reason that if she wants my life back, then I should give it to her. But you don't have to, Phil countered. You can choose for yourself. You can decide to live, even if you think your fate is to die. At the expense of my goddess? Do you know how selfish that is? The Pythia hissed, glaring at Phil now. Something in Phil's face softened at this. Being selfish isn't always bad, Phil said, leaning forward again. It's human. I'm a vessel, the Pythia forced out between gritted teeth. I'm not supposed to be human. I'm something greater. A heavy silence hung between them. Phil pressed his lips together, giving the Pythia a long look before pushing to his feet once again. Not supposed to be, or not allowed to be? Phil asked, his eyes glinting. Then, before the Pythia could even try to formulate a response to that, Phil turned on his heel and headed for the door to the cell. He let it slam shut behind him, the resounding boom echoing off the walls and hammering into the Pythia's skull. The bird in his chest let out a mournful croon. In the end, his talk with Phil only left him feeling more hollow than before. Nearly an hour after Phil left, Tommy came in, mentioning a checkup with Sam he'd just had on his lungs and complaining that Sam still refused to put a lighter in his prosthetic hand. The Pythia didn't mention the fact that Phil had been there earlier, and it seemed that Phil kept that same silence, because Tommy never asked him about it. While they ended up leaving the cell that day, they avoided the cafeteria and spent most of the day in Nikki's tattoo parlor. No one talked about the argument, but he could feel Nikki's worried gaze lingering on him when she thought he wasn't looking. It hung over their heads like a cloud. But until it rained on them, they all silently agreed to ignore it. When he and Tommy eventually returned to the cafeteria the next day, dozens of eyes followed him, making his skin prickle as he pressed himself against a wall. Ainsley, Rambu, Sam, Ponk, they all stared. At him or Tommy, he wasn't sure, but they were staring, and that was enough to make the Pythia want to run back and hide from all of it. When his breath stuttered in his chest, he squeezed his eyes shut, trying to ignore the feeling of bugs crawling under his skin. It wasn't working, though. It wasn't working, and it was getting more difficult to breathe. He needed to get out of here. He needed to get away from the eyes. He needed to hide himself away where they couldn't judge him when he was only trying to follow his goddess, and cool metal wrapped around his fingers. The Pythia blinked his eyes open behind his blindfold and saw Tommy was grabbing his hand, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Is this okay? The buzzing was still there, like it always was with Tommy's touch. But it was less distracting than before. Not toned down, but almost comforting. It gave him something to focus on besides the eyes fixated on him. Tommy had mentioned that touch grounded him. Now, the Pythia was beginning to understand what that meant. He squeezed Tommy's hand and gave him a small nod. Tommy smiled and squeezed back, and the warmth that spread over his palm wasn't overwhelming like it had been before. It was nice. More days passed. The stares lessened. Phil's words echoed in the Pythia's mind. What if I told you that you don't need a reason to exist? He had a reason to exist, and that was to serve Clara. The former Pythia had told him that he owed her his very breath. That was something he'd accepted a long time ago. Phil was wrong, and therefore his words should have meant nothing to him. Except he couldn't get them out of his mind. He continued to go through the motions, following Tommy around, talking with Nikki and Jack, avoiding everyone else's glares. The same thing over and over and over again. And the question continued to circle in his mind. The question of what he should do next. The question of what he could do next. It was getting more difficult to push down the anxiety buzzing deep in his chest. His gut twisted, his skin crawled. Every breath was something he had to fight for. In a way, it was like the fear and the anger and the confusion had formed a giant blob inside of him. The blob was growing larger with the day, and it would only be a matter of time before it ripped out of him entirely. He reached his breaking point in Nikki's tattoo parlor. The day had been rather uneventful. After another tense breakfast, the Pythia had followed Tommy around while he did some chores in the temple, like cleaning and repairs on a few floating lights, before they ended back up with Nikki and Jack. The Pythia had been feeling off the entire day, like his skin was too tight or his breathing wasn't as even as it should have been. It didn't make sense because nothing bad had happened, but something inside of him had shifted, and it was getting near impossible to pretend it hadn't. "Hey, you there?" An elbow nudged his side, and the Pythia jumped as he was jolted out of his thoughts. Tommy sat beside him, their shoulders brushing from where they were both sitting on one of the beanbags near Nikki's desk. Yeah, sorry," the Pythia stammered, blinking a few times. "What did you say?" "Jack asked you something," Tommy said, pointing to Jack, who was sitting on the ground across from them. He turned his head to Jack. "Shit, sorry." "Don't worry about it, man," Jack reassured him, flashing him a smile. "We were shit-talking rich people, so I was just wondering what the most pompous rich bullshit you saw go on in the palace was." "Oh. At least that was an easy question." Schlatt once had sprinklers installed outside his windows to create fake rain because his therapist suggested he tried sleeping to rain sounds. As expected, Jack, Tommy, and Nikki's eyes all went wide at that. "Why didn't he just play recorded rain sounds?" Nikki asked, her brows furrowing. "Said he didn't want, and I quote, that fake shit," the Pythia explained. "He only wanted real rain." "Did he like it?" Jack asked. The Pythia snorted and shook his head. "Nope. Said it annoyed the fuck out of him and got them taken out the next day." Tommy scoffed. "All that work for nothing." "Yup. Schlatt was great at wasting people's time," the Pythia said, slumping further back into the beanbag. "He kept arguing with the palace surgeon about the color of his cybernetic eyes because they weren't the right shade of red. Got them changed about 3 times before he was finally happy with them, even though they looked basically the same every time." "That doesn't fucking surprise me," Tommy muttered, nudging his shoulder against the Pythia's. "I've heard those rich fucks are super wasteful when it comes to cybernetics and all that shit." The Pythia shrugged. "Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. It's not about the money, though. They're more willing to pay out the arse for the enhancements. But a lot of them don't like having more surgeries than necessary just because of the recovery time. Schlatt didn't care, though, because it gave him an excuse to sleep for 3 days straight every time." Jack snorted at this, while Tommy glared at the wall. Meanwhile, something thoughtful flashed over Nikki's face, her eyes flickering to his blindfold as she rested her chin in her hands. Actually, that just reminded me of a question I've been meaning to ask you, she said, straightening up in her chair. What color are your eyes, Pythia? The Pythia stiffened. What? I realized that because of the blindfold, none of us know what color your eyes are, Nikki pointed out. You don't have to say if you don't want to. I'm just curious. Oh. The Pythia had never been asked that before. Of course, he heard the rumors people made up about his eyes, that they glowed in the dark or were completely white because of Clara. It wasn't true, but it wasn't like he felt the need to correct them either. It's not like it mattered. But Nikki wanted to know what color his eyes were. I bet they glow, like gold or some shit, Jack chimed in. If you got a curse inside of them, they gotta look cool, right? Ignoring the way his chest squeezed at the soft look on Nikki's face, the Pythia shook his head. No, they don't. He took a shaky breath, unsure of why his nerves only grew at such a simple question. Why is it just brown? At this, Nikki smiled. I can picture that. Brown eyes suit you. They're just eyes. The Pythia shrugged, gaze falling to the ground. You know, Tommy suddenly cut in. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with brown. You should have lied and said they do glow, because that's way fucking cooler. Tommy! Nikki scolded. It's not an insult. I'm just saying, if I were him, I'd say my eyes glow, like orange or some shit, just naturally. How cool would that be? Despite how tight his skin felt, the Pythia couldn't help but laugh at that. Why orange? Tommy shrugged. Well, it doesn't have to be orange specifically, but you should say your eyes glow some wild, unnatural color just for shits and giggles. It's not like anyone could prove you're lying. How do you know I'm not lying about my eyes being brown? The Pythia asked, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Because that'd be a lame fucking lie, that's why. Tommy shot back. You lie to make yourself more interesting, not more boring. That's why you say you're 6'3", when you're actually 6'1", Jack chimed in, flashing Tommy a shit-eating grin. Tommy's face went beet red. You motherfucker, I am 6'3". If you wear platform boots, maybe, Jack teased, while Nikki stifled her giggles beside him. I'm with Jack here. You're definitely not 6'3". The Pythia agreed. What the fuck, man? Tommy gasped, punching the Pythia in the arm. Don't hit me, dickhead. The Pythia shot back, slapping Tommy's hand away. There's no way you're only 2 inches shorter than me. Tommy frowned. You're not 6'5". I am too. Ah, not. I am. Got measured at the palace and everything. Oi! Shut up before I get a headache. Jack cut in, silencing them both. Tommy, mate, I don't know what to tell you, but I definitely believe the Pythia is 6'5" before I believe you're 6'3". He is pretty tall, Nikki agreed, nodding as her eyes flickered over the Pythia's frame. I hate all of you, Tommy grumbled, leaning into the Pythia's side. Over the past few days, The Pythia had slowly grown used to the buzzing that always came to life under his skin whenever Tommy brushed against him. Sometimes he'd grab his hand, and other times he'd just nudge his shoulder. On rare occasions, he'd go completely limp against the Pythia, like he was doing now. And without thinking about it, the Pythia found himself leaning back into Tommy as well. It was in these moments, when the air was filled with the echoes of laughter and warmth was blooming in his chest, that he could forget about all his worries with Clara, just for a moment. He could ignore the anxiety humming under his skin, silence the questions spinning around his head, and just let himself be. But it was only for a moment. And like all moments, it didn't take long for it to shatter. The door to the tattoo parlor groaned as it was pushed open. All four of them fell silent, their heads snapping to the doorway to see who was there. A rock dropped into the Pythia's gut when his eyes met dozens of eyes tattooed across pale skin. "Oh, hi, Techno," Nikki said, pushing to her feet. "What's up?" Techno paused, his red eyes flickering over the Pythia and Tommy, before darting back to Nikki. "I was just talking to Sam, and he wanted me to ask you how those upgrade enchantments are coming along." Nikki blinked, her eyes widening. "Oh, yeah, hang on." She hurried over to her desk, grabbing a bright blue sketchbook out of one of the drawers and opening it up to a random page. She flipped through it for a few moments, before snapping her fingers and holding it out to Techno. "Here's what I have so far. I'm sure it'll need adjustments, but I won't know what I need to do unless he tests it out on a prototype." Techno nodded, eyes skimming over the page before pushing it back towards her. "That's fine. He's still finishing up the prototype, so he'll probably bring it over in another day or two." Nodding, Nikki closed her sketchbook again and put it back in her desk. Once the drawer was shut, she turned back to Techno, who was now awkwardly standing beside the door. Sorry to interrupt," Techno then said, glancing back at the Pythia again. "I'll head out now." "You don't have to leave," Nikki cut in, and the Pythia had to resist the urge to curse. Techno froze, one hand reaching for the door. "I mean, you guys are having a conversation. I don't want to butt into that." Techno, you don't need to worry about that," Nikki reassured him, reaching out to loop her arm through his so she could guide him back into the room. "You're always welcome in here." Either Nikki was oblivious to the awkward looks Techno kept flashing his way, or she simply didn't care as she led Techno over to where the rest of them were sitting. When she gestured for him to sit in one of the beanbags besides the one the Pythia was sharing with Tommy, the Pythia knew it had to be the latter option. She knew full well what she was doing, and the Pythia wanted the ground to swallow him whole because of it. Sure, it wasn't as if he and Techno were on bad terms with each other, but they weren't anything close to friends. Techno was as stiff as a board as he sat down on the beanbag, the rings on his fingers glinting in the electric candlelight as he folded his arms over his chest. Meanwhile, Tommy had moved away from the Pythia's side, and although their shoulders were still brushing, he wasn't slumped against him like before. The Pythia tried to ignore how cold the absence was. He had bigger things to worry about. So, Techno, Jack jumped in, shattering the ice before it could even fully form. How tall would you say Tommy is? Without missing a beat, Techno said, "He's 6'1". What? Techno! Tommy's voice cracked in protest. Techno huffed. Just because you keep saying you're 6'3" doesn't make it any more true. I can't believe this! Tommy exclaimed, shaking his head. Fine, then how tall would you say he is? He continued, pointing at the Pythia. Techno's brows furrowed. Both of you stand up for me. Tension momentarily forgotten, the Pythia pushed to his feet, dragging Tommy up beside him. They turned to stand back to back, and the Pythia had to hold back a laugh when he felt Tommy rise up onto his tiptoes. Tommy, stop doing that, Techno scolded. Immediately, Tommy dropped back onto his feet. All right, you can sit again. The two sat down on their shared beanbag, Tommy shooting Techno a glare that was so fierce it could rival the sun. The Pythia is at least 6'5", if not 6'6". Take that, you fucking gremlin! The Pythia exclaimed, elbowing Tommy as hard as he could without actually hurting him. Oh, fuck off! You're all a bunch of liars! Tommy shot back, scowling at everyone in the room. You're just mad that I'm so much taller than you, the Pythia teased. No way, Tommy scoffed. You know it's possible to be too tall? That's what you are. You're like a fucking lamppost. But you hit your head on doorways like a dumbass if you don't duck because you're too goddamn tall for them. The Pythia frowned, thinking back to all the times he'd nearly slammed his head into a doorway walking around the palace when he was first going through his growth spurt. Oh shoot. Shut the fuck up, the Pythia said, for lack of a better comeback. At this, Tommy lit up. Holy shit, you totally hit your head on doorways! I said shut up. I wish I could get that on video. How fucking funny would that be? Just seeing you walk along and totally dome yourself on a doorway like an idiot. As the two began to bicker, Techno turned to Nikki and Jack, raising a single eyebrow at them both. Are they always like this? Jack snorted. I don't know where you've been, but yeah, they're always like this. Something thoughtful flashed over Techno's face at this. He settled back into his beanbag, watching as the Pythia and Tommy's voices both faded, their pointless argument dying out as quickly as it started. Drink break. A few beats passed. The Pythia squirmed under the weight of Techno's stare. Did you know that Schlatt apparently had sprinklers installed outside his windows for fake rain sounds to help him sleep at night? Jack suddenly asked, grinning at Techno. Techno frowned. I'm not surprised he'd do something as stupid as that, but, how do you know that? The Pythia told us, Nikki said, pointing at him. We were talking about how ridiculous the rich people in the palace are earlier. The Pythia clenched his jaw as all eyes turned to him again. Techno's frown only deepened. You run into a lot of ridiculous rich people, I'm guessing? Yeah, I do. The Pythia shrugged, gaze falling to his lap. They're all a bunch of pricks. Another moment passed. You know, it's kind of interesting how you don't seem to include yourself with the rest of those rich palace people, Techno pointed out. Immediately, the Pythia stiffened. What? I'm just saying. You're saying the others are ridiculous, like you weren't wearing a veil made of literal pearls the night Tommy kidnapped you. Techno hummed, leaning back against the wall. That's traditional Pythian garb, the Pythia argued, his voice cracking. For one thing, I hated wearing it. And another thing, it's been passed down for generations, so it's not like it was specifically made for that ball. Look, I'm not trying to criticize you here, but you did benefit from all the taxes the palace wastes, just like all the other rich folks. The Pythia furrowed his brows. What are you trying to do here? I'm not trying to do anything, Techno said, holding his hands up in mock surrender. But you gotta admit, you were living a pretty cushy life on taxpayer money up until Tommy kidnapped you. Beside him, Tommy groaned. Techno, please don't go all anarchist on him now. Techno huffed. I'm not going anarchist. He paused then, his eyes glinting like he'd just thought of something. But that does remind me. I've been wondering what you think about politics, Pythia. This was heading into dangerous territory. The Pythia could tell that much. Never a good way to start a conversation, Jack muttered under his breath. As the Pythia, I'm not supposed to have political opinions of my own. My purpose is to advise the Emperor according to Clara's will, and nothing more. The Pythia explained in time, with the former Pythia's words echoing in his mind. Techno narrowed his eyes. You don't have political opinions? I'm a neutral party, the Pythia confirmed. A neutral party that supports the Emperor, Techno countered. So as long as Schlatt is in Clara's good graces, you support everything he's done? The Pythia grit his teeth. No, of course he didn't support all the things Schlatt has done. But it wasn't his place to criticize Schlatt's leadership. Even if it was, it's not like Schlatt would have listened to him. So it was a moot point either way. I wouldn't put it like that, the Pythia said, choosing his words with the care of walking through a minefield. You're an advisor to Schlatt, correct? Techno asked. The Pythia nodded. Then have you been the one advising him to take the country in the direction it's been going? Techno. It's a fair question that he can answer for himself, Tommy, Techno said, cutting Tommy off before he could start. The Pythia fought the urge to shrink behind Tommy. It was a fair question, one that he knew he was going to get eventually. He just had to be careful how he answered it. I only advise him according to the visions Clara sends me, and I'm not his only advisor, the Pythia explained. Techno considered this. But you're his highest ranked advisor. The anxiety was back in full force now, and the Pythia felt bile burn the back of his throat. Technically speaking, yes, but that doesn't mean I have more of a say than the others. It does, though, Techno retorted. This country has been going downhill for a long time, but it's only sped up under Schlatt's rule. The wealth divide is the worst it's ever been, inflation is going nuts, he takes bribes from every corporation under the sun. We're falling apart out here, and apparently Clara doesn't care. Anger began to stir in the Pythia's gut. Watch what you're saying, Deathling. I'm the only one who can speak for Clara. Well, either you're doing a shit job of it, or I'm right and Clara doesn't care at all that the country under her protection is tearing itself apart. So which is it? Techno challenged, sitting up straight as his bright eyes burned into the blindfold. The Pythia's gut was twisting in on itself with nerves. Anxiety rushed through his veins, the bile getting higher and higher as his lunch threatened to make a reappearance. And it was only worsened by the red coals of anger simmering in his gut. Techno had no idea what he was talking about. Clara did care about the country. She always had. But it was Schlatt who didn't care about her. Schlatt didn't give a shit about him either, but that wasn't the important part here. Clara obviously cares about the country, the Pythia shot back, his words trembling as he curled his hands into fists. So it's the first one then. You're just bad at your job? Techno asked, looking unimpressed. Or did you want things to go in this direction? Techno, that's enough! Tommy snapped. Look, Tommy, I've been waiting for answers to these questions for ages now. The Pythia can answer for himself. He's an adult, Techno said, shooting Tommy a sharp look before focusing back on the Pythia. I'm not trying to attack you. I'm just saying that some things aren't adding up. The Pythia's breath was coming faster now. You don't understand how things work in the palace. You're right, I don't. So tell me how it works. I can't. Because you're afraid of what we'll say? Techno questioned. The Pythia shook his head. No, it's not. It's more complicated than that. It's really not, though. You're an advisor who sees the future, but the country is falling apart. How is that happening? Techno pushed, leaning closer. I can't tell you that, the Pythia forced out, his heart pounding in his ears. Clara is supposed to keep you safe, but you got kidnapped by us anyway. Why did that happen? Techno continued. The Pythia winced. I told you I can't tell you. Was it that she wanted this to happen? That she was planning for you to get kidnapped by us? No, it wasn't that at all because Clara cared about him. She had to. He was hers and nothing was going to change that, no matter what bullshit Techno said. He was hers. He had always been hers. Why was that so painful to remember now? Techno was still talking. Because I gotta be honest, I was a little surprised at how the plan went out without a hitch and was starting to wonder if Clara... And just like that, the dam inside of him broke. It's because Schlatt never fucking listened to me! The Pythia shouted, cutting Techno off. I had a vision about the ball and being kidnapped, but he refused to cancel. And I wish I could say that was the first time, but he only ever listened to my advice if it agreed with what he already wanted to do, which it usually didn't. So when you keep fucking saying that I have all this power that's not fucking true, because I didn't have any power. His chest was heaving. Ringing echoed in his ears. The bird screamed. The silence was deafening. 4 pairs of eyes stared at him in blatant shock. Nikki, Jack, Techno, Tommy. None of them had been expecting that. And for the briefest of moments, the Pythia was almost proud. Then he realized what he did. Oh no, he whispered, the ringing getting louder in his ears as he shakily pushed to his feet. No, I wasn't supposed to... He wasn't supposed to say that. The relationship between the Emperor and the Pythia was sacred. What they discussed was between them, Clara, and no one else. Except now that included the Deathlings. Of all the people to share that with, the Pythia had admitted that to the Deathlings. The bird jammed its beak into his ribs as he stumbled back against a wall. He broke Clara's trust. It was so easy he didn't even think about it. He admitted all of that in one fell swoop. And now Tommy was standing up, and Techno was saying something, but he couldn't hear it over the ringing in his ears. And Nikki was giving him a worried look, while Jack seemed confused, and Tommy was walking towards him, but his back hit the wall, and he realized he was trapped. This might be where the panic attack is going to happen, so if any of you are triggered by that kind of stuff, please keep yourself safe. Do whatever you need to do to keep yourself safe. You guys matter to me. The tattoo parlor had seemed spacious before, but now it was suffocating him. All he could feel was the warm air sliding down his throat, and the weight of Techno, Nikki, Jack, and Tommy's stares lingering on him, tracking his face, damning him with the knowledge they all now held. He couldn't be here right now. The stairs, the electric candles, the silent words floating in the air, it was too much. Far too much. He needed to get away from it or else he was going to implode. So without thinking, he threw open the door and sprinted out into the temple. There were shouts behind him as he ran, but he didn't pay any attention. He ran through the main chamber, gasping under Kristen's knowing gaze. His boots thudding against stone sent jolts through his entire body, but he kept going. He didn't make a break for the exit to the temple. Instead, he ran past it and towards his own cell. But he didn't want to be there either, because he could still be seen by Tommy, by Techno and Phil, by Clara. The Pythia couldn't bear for Clara to see him right now. Not when he'd just failed her so spectacularly. A hand brushed against his shirt as he ran down the hallway. He didn't look back. He just kept running, and running, and running. Until the bathing room doorway appeared, and the Pythia let the darkness swallow him whole. As soon as the light disappeared, his other senses returned in one fell swoop. His ears popped as all sound came back. He could hear his boots shuffling against the stone, the babbling water running over the rocks, his own breath scraping in his throat. He walked blindly through the cave until he heard a soft splash. Bending down, warm water brushed his fingertips, and he realized he was sitting right against the bathing pool. Finding a dry rock, he sat down and brought his knees up to his chest. His head was throbbing, the blur of magic still visible even in total darkness. Without thinking, he yanked the blindfold off his head, squeezing his eyes shut as he stuffed the fabric in his pocket. The thick steam that swirled around the room made it even more difficult to breathe than before, and he gasped for air. The bird was pecking over and over at his ribs, pieces of bone falling into his chest cavity and rattling every time he filled up his lungs. He curled in on himself as the panic inside of him only grew. It was one thing to say that he failed Clara by not escaping on his own. It was a whole other thing to truly fail her by breaking one of her most important tenets. She was his purpose, and he failed her. So where the fuck did that leave him? He didn't know. He was hers, and without her, he was nothing. Wilbur? Tommy's voice jolted him out of his panic for just a moment. He snapped his head up to try and see where Tommy was, before realizing he'd have no way of seeing him in darkness like this. I saw you run in here. I really hope you didn't try to drown yourself or anything, because I really don't want to go swimming in my clothes, Tommy continued, his voice echoing strangely off the stone walls. Opening his mouth, he tried to say something to tell Tommy where he was. Instead, all that came out was a broken sob. Wilbur? Tommy called out again, fear leaking into his words. You okay? Although he wanted to stifle it, another sob racked his body, and Tommy's footsteps got closer. Hey, it's okay. No one's pissed at you. Tommy said, his voice louder now. Can you, make another sound so I can find you? He didn't even try to speak this time. A strange, keening whine spilled past his lips, his head beginning to spin from his struggle to breathe. Suddenly, he could feel someone standing right in front of him. Shit, there you are, Tommy muttered, shifting sounds telling him that Tommy was now crouched in front of him. Come on, Will. Talk to me. What's going on? His words had already caused so much damage. He wasn't sure if he could find the will to say anything else. Before he could even try to form a sentence, though, he blinked, and suddenly he was gripped with ice-cold fear. My blindfold, it's not... He squeezed his eyes shut, his words breaking off into more whining noises. Hey, no, it's okay. I can't see your eyes in here, Tommy reassured him, his voice dropping to something lower. You gotta breathe, man. You're gonna pass out if you don't. He forced a shuddering breath through his chest, the hot air sticking to his throat and making his lungs burn even more than they already were. His head was spinning, his ears were ringing, and despite the darkness, it was still so much. He was floating in the void. He was laid bare for no one to see. wasn't supposed to. His breathing hitched. I said too much. I said way too fucking much, and Clara's going to. Hey, don't think about Clara. Don't think about Clara right now. Tommy told him. I have to. His voice cracked again. No, you don't. Tommy insisted. All you gotta do right now is breathe. He was trying. Fuck, he was trying. But the air was too hot. The darkness was suffocating him. Bone shards were rattling in his chest. He could feel everything and nothing at the same time. It was too much, but it wasn't enough, and the bird was still pecking and pecking and pecking. An ice-cold hand wrapped around his arm. It was a shock to the system. Something to drag him out of the void and back to the rock he was sitting on. The engravings in Tommy's prosthetic dug into his skin. Pinpricks of pain radiating up and down his arm in a way that was more comforting than he ever imagined pain could be. Does this help? Yes or no? Tommy said, his grip on his arm tightening. He nodded, before realizing Tommy wouldn't be able to see it. Yes, he forced out. Please don't let go. He reached his other hand out, blindly searching in the dark. When his fingertips brushed against fabric, he yanked his hand back on instinct. But Tommy's other hand quickly found his own, and another anchor wrapped around him. The buzzing was back, but it was something he needed now. It was a distraction from the storm in his head. The bird stopped its pecking, and the bones stopped rattling as the buzz took over it all. Without thinking, he tipped forward, and Tommy grunted at the sudden weight against him. He didn't care. He needed the buzzing to be louder, to silence the thoughts echoing off the walls of his skull. It wasn't a hug. It was more desperate than that. More greedy, more selfish. He buried his face in what he guessed was the crook of Tommy's neck, and gasped for air once more. He was sure he was squeezing Tommy tight enough to bruise, but Tommy didn't complain. He held him back with just as much force, and as dull pain began to flash up his arms, he breathed out a sigh of relief. For one precious moment, only 3 things existed in the world. The dry rocks under his legs, the babbling creek beside them, and Tommy's breaths in his ear. That was all. There were only 3 things around to witness him. So in that moment, for the first time in years, Wilbur cried. Ugly sobs forced their way out of his chest, over and over again as he gripped onto Tommy like he was going to disappear the moment he pulled away. His head throbbed and his throat ached, but he couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. Failure and fear and anger and frustration balled itself up in his chest, crushing the bird as hot tears carved tracks down his cheeks. Minutes passed and they felt like hours. Minutes passed and they felt like seconds. Eventually, the tears stopped, and the Pythia took a full breath once again. Fuck, he muttered, his voice hoarse as he pulled away from Tommy. The arms around him went limp, but Tommy didn't let go of him entirely. his prosthetic hand wrapped around his fingers, and the Pythia gave it a grateful squeeze as he took another breath to steady himself. If you say you're sorry, I'm gonna punch you in the fucking face, Tommy said before he could get the words out. The Pythia frowned at where he guessed Tommy's face was in the dark. Why? Tommy scoffed. Because you have no reason to apologize, dumbass. I just had a complete breakdown, a panic attack. Tommy cut him off. You had a panic attack, Will. You're not apologizing for that. The Pythia clenched his jaw. Still, Suddenly, there was red-hot pain in his eye. What the fuck? He yelped, slapping Tommy's hand away from his face. Just jammed your finger in my eye! I was trying to smack you, but I'm not used to your eyes being there, man! Tommy exclaimed, shifting as he got to his feet. Come on, get up. I'm already starting to sweat in here. The Pythia's legs trembled under his weight as Tommy pulled him up. Thankfully, Tommy seemed to guess this, and let the Pythia lean against him as they both found their footing on the smooth rock. The bird had gone silent, but so had everything else. The buzzing, his fears, his relief, it was all gone. After the outpouring of whatever that was, it seemed like he was left with nothing but a shell. As a familiar haze settled over his mind, he dug into his pocket and pulled the blindfold out once again. Tommy waited for him to tie it around his head, and he winced as soon as the magic went back into effect. You good to go? Tommy asked. No. The Pythia wasn't good to go, because the minute they left the cave he was going to have to confront what he did. Reality would come crashing down as Clara's gaze weighed him down once again. Cool metal was still wrapped around his fingers. Tommy was the only reason he was standing right now. But for some reason, that didn't scare him. Because Tommy wasn't going to let him fall. No, but I'll live, he said, forcing himself to take a step towards the cave exit. Let's just go back to my room. In the dark, the Pythia couldn't see the look of surprise Tommy gave him at that. Even so, they gripped each other's hands as they made their way out of the cave. Wait, this was a reference? If any of you guys recognize where I got the joke about a rich person putting sprinklers outside of a window to simulate rain, you understand me on another level. What's the reference? I want to know. I want to know what the reference was. Does anyone know? Now I gotta know. Hold on. Whoa, my mouse just went away for a moment. Okay, 1 second. Hmm. Hmm. I can't find anything. Man. I really wanted to know. Oh well. I think that's gonna be my stream though. Because I have some things that I need to do before Betty Bye time. Alright. Thank you all so much for watching. No idea when this VOD is going to be up on the VODs channel because I have to upload the rest of them. And I have quite a few in there. So, yeah. Alright. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. And I will see y'all next time. Bye!